Today is October 3rd. We are at the Student Life and Culture Archives. My name is Jessica Ballard, and I am here with Paul Schroeder. So thank you very much for agreeing to do an interview with us. So can you please state your name and the years you were at UIUC?
Right, it's Paul Schroeder, and I was here from the fall of '64 until I graduated in the spring of '68.
Okay. And how did you become involved in student protests or activism? And can you talk a little bit about that path?
Sure. When I came to school here, I was a accounting major in the business school, and had a pretty had an idea of what direction I was going to be going here. But within my first semester, I realized that accounting really wasn't my future, and I transferred to LAS. And in LAS, I'm just giving you step by step. In LAS, I ended up majoring in political science, which was an appropriate major, I think, for me, and I enjoyed it. My accounting professor, thought I would be good at, various things, even though I was out of the College of Commerce, and he said, "Why don't you join the board of the Illini Publishing Company," which in those days was actually the owner of the Daily Illini and the ILIO, the student radio station. What was it called? I can't remember the technograph. But anyway, the student publications fell under the Illini Publishing Company. And there were 4 faculty members and 2 student members. I think they had a student or 4 student members. I went on as a junior at the encouragement of my former accounting professor, which was fine. And I had studied hard. I was always a devoted student while I was here. And it was through being a student member of the board of the Illini Publishing Company that I got introduced to kind of the core group of student, government, and DI people who were involved, right, which I hadn't been involved. So I started getting involved, and then through getting to know the leadership of the Student Senate, I served on several Senate committees, even though I wasn't a student senator, that were evaluating like university policies related to students. So my entry into advocacy or activism, which I've pretty much maintained my whole life, started with educational reform coming out of student government. And that kind of culminated in the spring of '68, which is when I graduated, with this ad hoc committee on educational reform, which was a coalition of people coming from lots of different departments who were taking the notion of institutional reform right into the university. So we're looking at the university rather than looking at the war mainly, which was the major issue. But of course, the war affected all of us. The draft affected all of us. And at that time, I started paying attention to the voices that were being raised against the Vietnam War. So during that period, I also personally attained a commitment that I wasn't going to go into the military and that I was going to be part of the resistance to the Vietnam War. And although that resistance sort of manifests itself after I left here, that's when I decided to do that. So that's kind of the course of things that led me from being a very diligent accounting major to being a person who was involved in challenging the university.
Right. So what forms of student activism were you involved in at UIUC?
Well, I outlined the basic profile, but I would say that, the educational reform issues were my primary occupation. When I was a senior, I was the director of a program called Freshman Seminar. And Freshman Seminar was a program that had existed under Student Senate, and it was like a smallish 20 to 30 people program that kind of cultivated future student leaders to be part of student government. But the Student Senate and the president of the Student Senate, when I was a junior, decided, well, we're going to do something different. We're going to make it a more kind of academically oriented project. So we recruited during the summer incoming freshmen to submit essays and apply to be part of this freshman seminar. We chose 100 freshmen, and what we did is we divided them up into like 6 groups or 8 groups. I have the document somewhere. And each group had its own leader, and they went and like visited professors in their homes or in their offices, and they got to know the university as a more personable setting than just the classroom setting, right? So freshman seminar, I don't think that it existed after that year, but that's what we did, and that's what I did when I was that was one of my activities as a senior. But that also, and we're looking a little bit past the university now, that brought me into contact with Heinz von Forster, who was the leader of the biological computer lab. And my connection with Heinz von Forster and people who I knew through the BCL, which was not necessarily an activist group of people, it was more like an innovations kind of a group of people. That's really what held me here when I got done with being a draft refuser and doing my 2 years of alternative military service, and I landed back here for a couple of years, and I was involved with lots of the people who were around Heinz von Forster, the biological computer lab, Herbert Brun, the experimental music classes, and things like that. So all of those things I participated in as an informal community member, but those are the kinds of things I was involved in.
Okay. So how did your family and friends feel about your activist activities?
This is where things, get difficult, personally. I would say that coming out very publicly with an alternative voice, which I was most public because I got the assignment to be the student speaker at the Centennial Convocation in the spring of '68. And this was a very tough assignment, and I had it only a couple weeks to get ready for it. But my parents attended, and they were of kind of two minds about the direction they saw me going. One of them was, we're happy you're being successful at what you do. But my mother especially was of, let's say, a bit more limited horizons as far as what was expected. And I would say that starting then, and then through my draft resistance, and then through my alternative military service, and then through many years of not having a standard job or a career path. I mean, I worked for myself. I drove a mail truck here in Champaign County. I remodeled houses. We were on the road, doing manual labor for a while. But before I went back to library school and become a librarian, as our daughter is now also with the archives concentration, I was pretty non-directed, and that was really hard on my parents, especially my mother. So I would say that it was kind of established a lifelong rift between myself and my family that we never actually really got over. Now, as far as my friends, by far the majority of my friends were, of a similar mind frame about pretty much everything.
And So were there any lasting repercussions that came out of your time as a student activist or changes in thought?
Yeah, I think that changes of thought is definitely an important concept. And, nobody can really come here without being challenged to have their thinking changed. I mean, that's the definition of what the university should be about, and certainly I was challenged. I was just thinking about any repercussions or changes of thought. Well, the first repercussion is once you get marginalized, it's pretty hard to either want to get back or get back in. So it was really hard for me to come back into a regular, kind of normal career path, which I did through going back to library school, which was 15 years after I graduated from here. I got back to school. On the positive side, something just flashed through my mind, but it's gone away. I can't ask Maisie for some assistance here, but yeah, we'll read that to me again, and I'll just.
Were there any lasting repercussions that came out of your time as a student activist, and or were there any changes in thought?
Right. Okay. So. Out of my time as a student activist, first of all, I got a couple of very interesting jobs here that kind of set my mind free from other ways of thinking. I got a job with Dean Rogers of the Liberal Arts College during this fall of 70 and early into 71 before I went to Madison to do my alternative service. I did a kind of a community ethnographic survey of the non-university community surrounding Champaign-Urbana. And by doing that, I really immersed myself in all kinds of people's lives and alternatives that opened my eyes to what alternatives there are out there, as well as creating bridges to the university, because university, he especially, was looking for ways to connect with the broader community. All of these activities, we met here. Maisie and I met here. Among other things, we were active with in the 70s with the efforts to close the old Champaign County Jail, which was a really terrible place. And I had actually been hired to do a study of the jail one summer, and that led to that. So that made a big change. The educational reform piece, I worked for the LAS College again for a little bit on a newsletter about teaching change in the LAS College. So all of these things kind of did set a new course. My connections with Heinz von Forster, put me into kind of an alternative intellectual space, which I never left. I'm still very involved in kind of cultivating that. So yeah, all of this added together to major awareness changes and life changes.
So what advice do you have for current students?
That's part of what we're here this weekend for.
It is.
Yeah, we want, there's going to be this young activist panel first thing in the morning tomorrow. And I think that the wrap-up is like where to go from here. And I certainly want to hear. I've been learning from Anita, like what the ambiance is here on campus. Anita asked me a similar question in the interview we did, and I guess what I came up with there is about what I'd say now is, figure out what your vision is and follow it, and just see where you can go with it, because life is a very unpredictable quantity, and take your vision as far as you can.
Great. So is there anything else that you would like to add?
No, but I think that the archives is doing the right thing to try to collect these stories and maintain the documentation and keep these histories alive. And so thanks for doing everything you're doing over here.
Well, thank you so much for helping us to increase our records.